When we think of Rome, our minds often travel to the forums filled with statues, the colosseums where the crowd roared, or the military campaigns that turned tribes into provinces. But that vision, though fascinating, is just the surface of something much vaster. Because Rome was not only a military power. It was a civilization hungry for knowledge, trade, and exploration. Its legions did not stop at the confines of Europe. Its ships sailed seas that others feared. Its traders crossed scorching deserts. And its ambassadors reached the most remote corners of the known world, and beyond. On this journey, we won't talk about mad emperors or bloody conquests. Today, we will follow the silent but impressive trail of the Roman explorers. Of those who carried the name of Rome to lands where Latin was not spoken, where imperial coins were seen as exotic objects, and where their linen clothes contrasted with Eastern silks. Yes, the Romans went farther than you have been told. To India, the heart of sub-Saharan Africa, Vietnam, China, Sri Lanka, to where history seemed to end. But Rome pushed it a little further. This is not just a map of routes and distances. It's a story about what a civilization can achieve when its ambition is as great as its empire. Long before Europeans dreamed of mapping the world, there was already an invisible path connecting two civilizations separated by thousands of miles, the Silk Road. It all began when the armies of the Han dynasty in China defeated the feared Xiongnu nomads, the ancestors of the Mongols. With blood and steel, they regained control of the Gansu Corridor, a narrow strip between desert mountains and fertile valleys. In doing so, they secured a vital trade route stretching from the far east of Asia to the Mediterranean coasts. Through that corridor, horses, jade, spices, and knowledge began to flow, but above all, silk. Chinese silk, so fine and shiny that it seemed made of water. It was a luxury reserved for emperors, but its fame crossed borders, and Rome heard of it. The Parthians, masters of the deserts of Iran, were the first to encounter this marvel. And they made sure to protect it as a treasure. Not for love of art, but for business, they would be the ones to resell it to the Romans at astronomical prices, acting as intermediaries between the two ends of the world. The Roman Empire, curious and insatiable, quickly became obsessed. When the consul Crassus, a member of the Triumvirate, decided to invade Parthian territory in 53 BCE, he did so not just for glory. He knew that the key to that enigmatic Eastern wealth was there. But he underestimated his enemy. Without effective cavalry and poorly advised, Crassus fell into a brutal ambush and was executed in a legendary manner. The Parthians poured molten gold down his throat, a macabre metaphor for his greed. Despite the military failure, Roman desire for silk only grew. So much so that by the time of Augustus, the entire aristocracy wore it. The Senate tried to ban its use, claiming it corrupted Roman customs. But it was useless. Silk was addictive. It was exotica, status, pure luxury. And so, without conquering China or even knowing exactly where it was, Rome fell in love with its softness. But this was only the beginning. Soon, the Romans would seek more direct routes, avoiding the Parthians, sailing farther, delving into Asia, and leaving traces that time still preserves. Rome knew that power was not only built with swords, but also with trade. And if silk, spices, and gems came from the east, then they had to be sought beyond the deserts, beyond the Parthians, beyond the known world. That's when the Romans looked to the sea. With Egypt already under imperial control, after the fall of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, the Egyptian ports became Rome's gateway to the Indian Ocean. From Berenice, Arsinoe, and Mos Hormuz, Roman ships set sail toward the coast of India. The Greek navigators serving the empire mastered the monsoon winds and charted routes to ports like Barbaricon, Budoch, Maziris, and Paduk, exotic names that began to appear in the scrolls of imperial merchants. And what they found there was a vibrant, immense market. India offered cotton, pearls, precious stones, ivory, spices, dyes, nard, medicinal flowers, and of course, silk. Rome, in exchange, offered what it knew best how to produce: gold, silver, fine jewels, glassware, wine, decorated linen, imperial coins, and promises of profits too great to ignore. In these ports, Roman gold flowed like a river, to the point that writers like Pliny the Elder complained that the empire's riches were vanishing eastward. But it didn't matter. The Roman upper class wanted exotic perfumes, soft fabrics, sacred stones, and was willing to pay any price. The Romans were also looking for more than goods in India, they were seeking the unknown. They admired its philosophy, its medicine, its architecture. In the workshops of Indian artisans, they saw techniques similar to their own. In the temples, they heard stories of gods and beliefs that, though different, stirred a spiritual restlessness that the Roman world was only beginning to understand. That connection was not fleeting. Archaeologists have found Roman amphorae on the Indian coast and imperial coins scattered like seeds of the empire. In Pompeii, a figurine of the Hindu goddess Lakshmi was even found, surviving the eruption of Vesuvius as proof that India had already taken residence in the heart of Rome. Rome and India, separated by oceans and cultures, met without the need for conquest. It was trade, not war, that built this invisible bridge between two ancient worlds. Rome was a civilization of temples, rituals, and family gods. But when it opened to the east, it also opened a door to mystery, to doctrines that spoke of renunciation, enlightenment, the wheel of karma, and the liberation of the soul. One of the most bewildering moments occurred when an ambassador from India arrived at the court of Augustus, bringing with him a very unusual gift, a diplomatic letter written on animal skin and, an unwavering act of faith. A member of his entourage, a Buddhist practitioner, burned himself alive in Athens as proof of his devotion. He did this before reaching Rome. He did not say a word. He did not ask for help. He simply sat in a lotus position, and surrendered to the fire. For the Romans, who did not understand the concept of spiritual sacrifice without gods, without an altar, without a tangible reward, it was a bewildering and disturbing scene. But also unforgettable. And that was just one of many silent cultural exchanges that flourished between Rome and the East. In the Egyptian port of Berenice, archaeologists discovered a statue of Buddha in a temple dedicated to the goddess Isis. It was there, surrounded by columns, amidst incense and chanting. A foreign god, in Roman land, welcomed by Buddhist traders who had been navigating the seas between India and the Red Sea for centuries. In Pompeii, among villas and frescoes, a small ivory figurine of the Hindu goddess Lakshmi appeared. How did it get there? In a box, in a spice bag, as a gift to a Roman lady, or as a talisman in the hands of a merchant. No one knows. But it was there. And that's enough. Even Christian authors, like Saint Jerome, recorded the story of Buddha's birth, a virgin, a prophetic dream, a divine incarnation. The story seemed familiar to them, but it did not come from Judea. It came from the Himalayas. It was another spirituality, another way of looking at the soul. These contacts were not massive. They did not transform the face of the empire. But they left marks. Marks on stone, in art, in memory. Because when a civilization listens, observes, accepts that there are truths beyond its borders, it begins to become eternal. For centuries, Rome and China were two empires that ignored each other, yet they were connected by the invisible threads of trade, rumor, silk, and dreams of expansion. They never met face to face, but they touched each other at the ends of the known world. It was through Vietnam, deep in Southeast Asia, where the paths began to intertwine. In the work Geographia by Claudius Ptolemy, written in the 2nd century, a group of Roman merchants is mentioned who arrived at a port city called Cattigara, at the mouth of the Cataris River. Today, archaeologists agree that this river was the Mekong, and Cattigara was the city of Oceo, in what is now southern Vietnam. There, in bustling markets among palm trees and mists, the Romans exchanged goods, coins, and stories with people who spoke unknown languages, wore light tunics, and revered nameless gods. The finds do not lie. Roman glass beads, jewelry, fragments of gold worked with italic techniques have been found in that region. It was the clear trace of a contact that, though fleeting, had monumental implications. Rome had reached the edge of the Han Empire, the threshold of China. And on the other side, Chinese chroniclers also took note. The scribes of the Han dynasty recorded the arrival of ambassadors from the kingdom of Daqin, as they called Rome. They came bearing curious gifts: elephant tusks, rhinoceros horns, turtle shells. Exotic objects they had collected on their travels through Southeast Asia before reaching Chinese lands. They claimed to have been sent by King Anduin, whom we now identify as Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. Although the Chinese records do not specify whether they were official diplomats or simple merchants acting on behalf of the emperor, it is clear that China and Rome knew of each other. Not as enemies, nor as allies, but as distant mirrors. Each one reflecting the other in the vastness of the world. Meanwhile, in the Roman courts, they spoke of the beings, the mysterious inhabitants at the end of the world who wove silk and had cities bathed in jade. And in the Chinese chronicles, there were stories about a vast Western empire, ruled by wise and proud men, who built eternal roads and amphitheaters where men fought against impossible beasts. There was no invasion. No conquest. But there was contact. And that, for two such distant empires, was already a form of shared eternity. The forgotten heart of Africa, the most surprising Roman expeditions. If the East seduced Rome with its silks, spices, and exotic philosophies, the South captivated it with an even greater mystery: deep Africa, that vast ocean of sand, jungle, and legends that stretched beyond the Sahara. A territory that could not be easily conquered with swords or coins, but that nonetheless awakened the curiosity of emperors, geographers, and soldiers. The first major foray was led by Cornelius Bulbus. In 19 BC, leaving Libya with 10,000 legionaries, he ventured into the land of the Garamantes, a Saharan civilization that thrived in hidden oases and fortified mud cities. They reached the Niger River, convinced it was the source of the Nile. But it wasn't. It was another world. Years later, another general, Suetonius Paulinus, crossed the Atlas Mountains, traversed the deserts of Morocco, and descended through increasingly inhospitable lands. Later documents confirm that some of his men reached the Dra River, bordering regions now close to Mauretania and the Sahel. But there were even more ambitious expeditions. Under the reign of Nero, a general named Septimius Flaccus received a strange order. He was to seek out the mythical Hippopotamus Lake mentioned by Ptolemy. He departed from Tripolitania, crossed the Tibesti Mountains, and entered the region we now know as Chad. There, according to accounts from Phoenician geographers, there were elephants, rhinoceroses, dark-skinned peoples, and unintelligible languages. And they were not the only ones. Festius, commander of the 3rd Legion Augusta, repeated part of Bulbus's journey and managed to reach the equatorial jungles, navigating the Niger River to reach the estuary, in what is now Nigeria. Years later, the diplomat Julius Maternus crossed the Gulf of Sidra, ventured into the oasis of Kufra, and met the king of the Garamantes while fighting a rebellious group known as the Ratia, near what is now the Central African Republic. As a gift, Maternus brought back a 2-horned rhinoceros to Rome, which was presented as a spectacle in the Colosseum. These were not colonial expeditions. They were adventures, explorations, bridges thrown into the abyss of the unknown. At a time when most civilizations did not look beyond their immediate borders, Rome sent men to cross the desert without knowing if there would be water, without knowing if they would return. And although they did not found provinces or build walls in those lands, they left traces, coins, ceramics, names, stories. Deep Africa was not conquered, but it was touched by Rome. And that fleeting and unlikely contact is one of the boldest testimonies of the Roman spirit. In the northwest corner of Africa, where the desert meets the sea and the Atlas Mountains cast shadows over the horizon, there existed an ancient kingdom called Mauretania. Not the modern country, but a land inhabited by Berber tribes who had learned to trade, wage war, and negotiate with the most powerful empires of their time. When King Bacchus II died in 33 BCE, Rome seized the opportunity. Instead of directly conquering the territory, they chose a more subtle strategy: to establish a client kingdom. They placed Juba II, a Numidian prince educated in Rome, on the throne, who was married to none other than Cleopatra Selene, the daughter of the legendary Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony. A political union, yes, but also a cultural one. Roman Africa was born with intertwined Egyptian, Greek, and Latin roots. Juba too was more than an imperial puppet. He was a scholar, an explorer, a lover of knowledge, and under his reign, Mauretania flourished as a commercial and scientific center. Inspired by Phoenician sailors, he organized expeditions to the Atlantic. From the port of Mogador, on what is now the coast of Morocco, his ship set sail for the Canary Islands, and possibly Madeira, seeking a secret coveted by Roman elites, purple dye, extracted from marine mollusks, symbolizing wealth and power. These missions did not just search for dyes. They were also attempts to push the boundaries of the known world into the open ocean, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, where it was believed the land ended and the abyss began. After Juba's death, his son Ptolemy of Mauretania inherited the throne, but his story was more tragic. Despite being educated in Rome, he came into conflict with Emperor Caligula, who ordered his execution in 40 CE. That act sealed the fate of the kingdom. 4 years later, Emperor Claudius annexed Mauretania as a province of the empire. He divided the territory into Mauretania Tingitana, with its capital in Tingis, modern-day Tangier, and Mauretania Caesariensis, with its capital in Caesarea, modern-day Churchill. Rome became the direct sovereign, and Latin influence began to shape the architecture, commerce, and religion of the region. But, like many other Roman provinces, Mauretania would not last forever. During the crisis of the 3rd century, when emperors fell like dominoes and the empire wobbled, the Berber tribes regained much of the control of the interior. Rome retained only a few coastal cities and ambiguous diplomatic relations with local leaders. And although centuries later, Diocletian would reorganize the provinces, and even Christianity briefly flourished under Roman rule, nothing could halt the ultimate change. In 631 CE, with the arrival of Islam, the Roman era in Mauretania faded away forever. But its legacy remained: ruins, coins, ancient names engraved in the desert rocks, and the forgotten history of an African kingdom ruled by the daughter of Cleopatra and a lover of knowledge, who challenged the ocean and united continents. The Roman Empire was not only a military colossus. It was also an insatiable civilization in its desire to know what lay beyond the horizon. While other peoples closed themselves off within their borders, Rome crossed them. Not only with swords, but with maps, ships, and questions. They reached the heart of Africa, the forgotten corners of the Ganges, the Mekong Delta, and perhaps, through indirect routes, even the walls of China. Not all journeys ended in glory. Some ended in defeat, in desert, in silence. But even there, the trace remained: Roman coins in strange lands, statues of Indian gods among the ruins of Pompeii, Indian elephants marching through Rome, or a Buddha sculpted and buried in an Egyptian temple. Rome was a war machine, yes. But it was also a machine of connection. It connected cultures, religions, ideas. It opened routes that centuries later would still be used by caravans, pilgrims, and merchants. And that may be its greatest legacy. Not the conquest, but the curiosity. Not the sword, but the desire to understand. Not just power, but the will to touch other worlds, to record other voices, to listen to other stories. When we look at the ruins of Rome, it is easy to think that it all ended there. But if we follow the Silk Roads, the ports of India, the desert oases, the lost coins in Vietnam, we understand something deeper. Rome was more than an empire. It was a door. And it had the courage to cross it.